Welcome back to the Serial Killer Podcast, the podcast where each week we discuss what serial mascots we could physically take on in a fight. Just kidding. This is Ben and Bran See a Movie. He's Ben. I'm Bran. This is...
And this is Ben and Bran.
Ben and Bran See a Movie.
See a Movie. And we're still a little off this week because I'm looking at you, Branson, currently from about 10 feet away, maybe?
Yes.
On a on a TV screen. A 32-inch TV screen that's kind of covered by lights. And so I only see about half of you right now.
Even when we're doing it over Zoom, you're still socially distanced from me.
I am.
Yeah, things are mostly okay, at least on my end. But we're taking an extra week just to, let Omicron sort of do its thing, and then hopefully it'll be out of our hair shortly, and we'll be back in person because I think we gel better in person.
Agreed. Because the best part is right now you are so off audio sync on my screen.
Oh crap!
Yeah, I can't even watch you fully talk right now because it's so off.
So yes, we're back this week, albeit separate, but we're still together in spirit, or those kind of fruity things. Not fruity, you know what I'm trying to say. Frilly things that they used to say at the beginning of this whole crap show. This week, we are talking about a much different movie than we talked about last week, I would say, yet still sort of falls into the comedy sort of net that we've cast this month.
Yeah.
A very wide net that covers, I think, the four corners of comedy in a way.
And that's an interesting question when we get into it. It's is this movie a comedy? Because I don't know. I really don't know if I would consider this movie a comedy straight up. But you're right.
It's more drama forward.
Yeah, in our definition, I guess, for comedy for this month, we're saying it's a comedy, but realistically, I don't know if I would categorize this as a comedy.
Yeah, this isn't one of the more comedic, comedy-centric Wes Anderson films. But with that being said, this is the Wes Anderson film Royal Tenenbaums, or the Royal Tenenbaums.
The Royal Tenenbaums, which is Wes Anderson's third directorial feature. This one comes out in 2001. Before it, he has Bottle Rocket and Rushmore that kind of establish him on the mark. This is very much the movie that makes him kind of Wes Anderson to the general public of moviegoers. Mm-hmm. This is really the movie that it clicks. And the cast, he gets to have this kind of insane ensemble featuring a lot of big performers, where before, he had, he was getting Murray in those movies. I think he has Owen and Luke Wilson. Mm-hmm. He has he has actors in them. This is the one where it's this is an all-star ensemble of who's who, which kind of becomes the trademark of Anderson's career.
Yes. And especially with certain individuals that appear quite often, like you said, the Wilson brothers and
Bill Murray, who I believe has been in every Anderson film.
I don't know if everyone. I know he's in Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou.
Yeah, I think he's been in all of them. Maybe minus Isles of Dogs. I think Isle of Dogs. I don't remember if he's in that. In every other one, though, I'm almost positive he appears.
Yes.
So I mean, that's, I think, 9 films. So at the very least, 8 of them starring Bill Murray or some sort of supporting role from Murray, with possibly 9 of them. Like I said, I don't remember Isle of Dogs because they're all voices. He might have a cameo role now thinking about it. He's definitely in Fantastic Mr. Fox as a voice.
Yes.
I recall that very clearly.
A good friend of mine who actually commented on our Instagram post at the Beneverse for him and at Bind Media for me, a good friend of mine, Andrew, posted on our post about this film, Royal Tenenbaums, and he said that it was his favorite movie of all time. And he is a huge, huge Wes Anderson fan. He's done his own personal rankings on his movie blog, The Beauty and the Beard. He's done rankings of Wes Anderson films, and he really likes them. So in light of that whole explanation, we want to have him on in the future. And I think, Ben, this is kind of the perfect week for us to
announce it,
put out a little teaser for the next sort of bracket thing we're doing. Last year we did Cage Off, which is where we put a bunch of Nicolas Cage movies into the ring and watched them duke it out in a Super Smash Brothers style, all against all. And we had Keith Phipps on as our guest, which was a really neat final episode of the Cage Off. And this year, our sort of bracket theme is going to be, Ben.
Yeah, I won't say it. I will let our artist say it here. We got the Wild Wild West.
Yes, that's what we're calling it. It is going to be.
I can't play it much longer.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I'm trying to get to the Wild Wild West part of it. Okay, come on, speed it up.
It's okay. No. It's going to be. It's
Wild Wild West. The Wild West.
Yes, we are doing the Wild West Showdown, and it's going to be a big old bracket of, I think, all of Wes Anderson's films. And
yes,
this is sort of the first one that we're doing
Cage,
as a trailer.
Where there's about 100 films, and about, let's be generous, let's say about 30 of them are unwatchable. This is actually, I believe, 9 to 10 films, with all of them being watchable movies.
Yeah.
Like, even if some of them I'm not the biggest fan or don't think are very good, they're still watchable.
Right.
So we're going to do that. So unlike last year where we kind of did it in the summer, we're going to kick it off with March Madness this year. Assuming March Madness still happens, which of course, with the world kind of being the way it is, assuming that something's going to happen in March is kind of a big leap on our part. But we are going with the assumption that we are going to be kicking it off in March, along with March Madness going on for the NCAA. Might not happen. NCAA
if you're not interested
might not happen.
If you're not interested in the basketball bracket, you can be interested in our Wes Anderson movie bracket.
Exactly. So
there you go.
We're going to be doing that. I know we are talking about having guests on, not just where we did last time, where Keith was probably, I think was the only guest I believe we had on.
Yeah, he was the only one for like the finale of Cage Off.
Yeah. This time we'll probably be having guests a little bit more throughout, where there's going to be weeks where it is just going to be Branson and I, but we will probably have 1 or 2 guests on during the actual episodes throughout the weeks. And then same thing as last year, I have a special guest who will be coming on for the very end of Wild Wild West, which I need to talk to you about after the air because I haven't told you about that. But yeah, you said, you mentioned, I'm blanking on his name. Is it Andrew?
Yes, Andrew.
Andrew will be joining us. In theory, Andrew should be joining us. He will be one of the guys that will probably pop on throughout. We'll probably have a few others who just either that's a Anderson film that connects with them. That's when they start writing, whatever the scenario ends. And this year is going to look a little bit different than Wild Wild West is going to look a little different than Cage Off did last year. We're going to see how that goes. We might have, last year with there being 16, maybe we're going to try this year, now that we have a little bit more of a social media presence. I want to at least try maybe floating the idea of a 32 bracket and then letting the fans. Yeah, and letting the fans vote for the final 16. So the first round is done by everybody. And then
how are we going to have 30? How are we going to have 32?
It would be characters. We'd have to do characters, right? We wouldn't be doing movies. We'd have to be doing best Wes Anderson characters or whatever it is. I think would be the theory. So that's kind crazy.
That's we're still working out the logistics.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that was where you were going.
We would have had the logistics a little bit more planned out during our meeting for the month. We haven't had that meeting now because of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we will get to that meeting eventually, so we will have kind of those ideas fleshed out. But yeah, that's kind of the general, I think, idea that I'm at least trying to incorporate for Wild Wild West. So a few more guests. Unlike last time, I know this time Branson and I have talked about doing what if we tried doing one singular like episode per movie and just kind of pre-recording a few, that way we can kind of put out 1 or 2 a week to kind of get it through the March Madness flow. 1, so it spaces it out for us. 2, so the discussions are a little bit thorough. And 3, honestly, so we don't go crazy.
Yeah.
The crazy part was real.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this would affect our psyches a little bit less than Cage Off did.
Are you crazy? Because I think this one would affect our psyche more.
Really?
Well, think about what Wes Anderson is, and we'll talk about more in this episode.
Yeah.
But there's a very particular
it would affect us
style.
in a different way, for sure.
It's kind of it's going to kind of start feeling not repetitive, but it is going to start feeling like we're going to see something in a very different way, like symmetrical. We're going to be thinking in a quite different way. Where Nick Cage, we still least explored genres. Wes Anderson himself is almost the genre.
Yeah, yeah.
That's going to be the challenge.
He makes Wes Anderson films.
So we're spacing it out to kind of, like I said, make it easier on all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Make it easier on getting guests on. And like I said, just, I think, putting out a better product overall. Not saying Nicolas Cage Off wasn't a great product. It was an amazing product, but it took a lot out of us on that 1 month.
Yeah. Oh my, the week with Vampire's Kiss was like, that was exhausting.
Well, not even that, but I mean, like, that was an exhausting week, of course. But, like, The Rock and Con Air, I think were both, like, 2.5-hour films.
Yeah.
Which meant we were watching movies for, like, 5 hours a week when we typically only watch for about 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours each week.
Right. Yeah, we were basically watching the we were watching the Jackson cut of Lord of the Rings pretty much every week.
Exactly. It was a lot. But anyway, so that's kind of the tease for what will be coming soon. We'll be back in person, hopefully, next week for our 1-year anniversary. Which
I'm going to will Omicron out of existence.
Yeah. The question now is, do I have to quarantine? We'll be finding that answer probably by Friday when this episode drops.
Next week.
We will determine if I am quarantined or not. So that's an exciting tease. You guys can put your bets in on FanDuel.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can you please make a poll on the Into the Veniverse story, like your Instagram story? Be like, is Ben positive for COVID? Yes or no?
See. But yeah, hopefully I'm not. Hopefully February goes pretty smoothly, because I know we have a lot. We have President's Week, we have Valentine's Day. I know we're trying to tie in movies to that, so we'll tease that at the end of next week's show. But anyway, that's kind of just the brief summation of what is going on right now.
That's what
just
we do
on the show and everything. And with that said, make sure, because we always forget to say this, make sure if you're listening, you're already still listening, you haven't done it yet, follow us on whatever podcast form you're listening to. Follow us on my YouTube channel, The Beneverse. Follow us on Instagram. Follow, like, comment, do all that stuff.
Give us a nice rating if you like on Spotify.
Yeah, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Do it all. It helps us all. So we thank you guys for the amount of growth that we've had. The fact, Branson, I forgot to tell you this. My Don't Look Up review just hit, I believe, 650 views as of today.
Whoa.
Which is just insane to me. And the response is still negative.
People really hate your input on Don't Look Up.
I cannot wait, because I'm releasing, I believe, later this week when you listen to this, or maybe it will be released the day you listen to it. I'm still determining, because I have to edit a ton. I did a brief review of every film that I saw in 2021, which is, I saw 80 movies that came out in the year 2021.
Yeesh.
And I did about a minute review for each movie.
Oh my goodness.
I'm still editing it. My hope is that it will be out, if not Friday, then probably Monday of this upcoming week. So that would be the 24th, I think.
That's a lot of movies to watch.
It's a lot of movies, and I watched, I think I watched 50 of them between November to January.
Mm-hmm. And that was just movies that came out in
2021.
Wow.
There's basically not a huge movie that I really missed this year, which was exhausting. But anyway, let's get into our talk on the Royal Tenenbaums.
Let's do it. So
And
you're dropping our film
I'm doing the film
historian.
historian this week, and feel free to jump in whenever you have anything on
Okay.
it. But I'll mention kind of the big picture ideas for the Royal Tenenbaums. Like I said, this was his third directorial feature, following Bottle Rocket and Rushmore, which were critical successes of the 90s and had a little bit of a cult following. And people knew who he was on the scale of an indie director, but he still hadn't hit quite the mainstream that he would be hitting in 2001 with the Royal Tenenbaums. This film comes out at a really interesting time in American history because this premieres at the New York Film Festival on October 5th, 2001, which means it follows a little less than a month right after 9/11 in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I think that's actually a really interesting thing because this movie, I think it hits a little bit of that subconscious like anxiety and fear that comes of a post 9/11 world. It's weird that a movie exists. A movie can take such a different connotation, even though it was made pre 9/11, but it's viewed in a completely different way post 9/11. And
yeah.
I think
You sort of draw the I guess ad hoc sort of connections, because you can really, after something as traumatic as 9/11, you can use that to relate to sort of the traumatic things that some of the characters in this film go through, especially the kids.
Exactly. And not only that, it also hits on this weird thing where it's the first time a movie going audience is really going to a movie together post 9/11, and now they all have this shared common experience, which there's very few events in human history, I would say, since it really the invention of cinema that really have connected people quite that way, where like you'll always remember where 9/11 was, and everyone who went to see the Royal Tenenbaums had an understanding and kind of that weight of what a 9/11 attack was like. I mean,
Yeah.
the only other ones that you could really put on that is probably Pearl Harbor and the Kennedy assassination, and
Right.
when we landed on the moon. Like those are kind of like
the
defining
tentpole moments of American
where everybody
history.
kind of remembers. Maybe the Challenger when MLK's assassinated Robert Kennedy.
Oh,
Stuff
yeah,
like
for
that, where
sure.
we all just kind of like everyone who was alive from that moment kind of remembers that. So when Royal Tenenbaums comes out in October in the film festival, gets critical acclaim, comes out December 14th, which means this film comes out basically 3 months post 9/11. And it becomes a big critical success. It had a budget of $21 million, which for reference, that is $33 million in today's currency. And for other reference, French Dispatch, which is the most recent Wes Anderson film, has a budget of 25 million, as did the Grand Budapest Hotel, which are two of his biggest films. His highest budget for a film is Fantastic Mr. Fox for
there's a
40 million.
crossover.
Yeah, that's a terrible Actually, I'd kind of like to see a Wes Anderson J.K. Rowling adaptation.
That'd be
There's
interesting.
something interesting there. But yeah, Fantastic Mr. Fox has a budget of $40 million. So this one has kind of this big budget, and it's really interesting because also this is kind of the last time we start seeing studios being so willing to give this type of money to a director to make kind of his like image. Like, and especially where Anderson is in his career. Like he's still a young, kind of up and coming unknown director.
Yeah,
like,
this is his third movie again.
Yeah,
so
he's not like the level of like Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, any of these guys kind of coming out of the 90s. You know, Soderbergh makes Ocean's 11 the same year that Anderson makes this movie, Royal Tenenbaums.
Right.
But so he
doesn't have the sort of studio pull or like the exec pull that like a George Lucas has or like a Spielberg has or some of those directors that you mentioned like Tarantino, where
he doesn't even have it.
They don't have the amount of success yet that would be like, here's however much money you need go make whatever you want to make.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a director now that would be like a good comparison of like, this is their movie and this is the type of budget you then give them to in a film that isn't, I guess, really considered like something universal. Like, because I thought
I've got
of
one
Denis
for you.
Villeneuve. Yeah.
Taika. We've talked about Taika a lot.
No, but Taika's different because he makes a franchise movie with Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And
yeah,
then
okay,
he gets to do
true.
the passion project with Jojo Rabbit.
Very true.
Like, I was thinking of Denis Villeneuve real quick because, you know, he gets to do Prisoners, Sicario, and then he gets to make Arrival, which I think is around a $45 million budget.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, those were, I think,
and
bigger
then he gets
movies
Dune.
than Anderson does. Yeah, then he gets Dune and Blade Runner. But, like, this would be...
that's right.
Who would this be a comparison? This would kind of be like if you took the director who did... Gosh, I'm even having trouble thinking of, like, what a good comparison would be. This would be like taking a director like Chloe Zhao, who did The Rider, then Nomadland. But instead of making The Eternals right next, this would be like if she took another movie that had kind of like a $60 million budget in it after she had made two small indie films, even though one of them wins the Oscar for Best Picture in Nomadland and The Rider. Like, she just gets to... Wes Anderson in this gets to just jump into a film that has a pretty significant budget behind him.
Yeah, I would say that Wes is a particularly lucky director in that sense, because that doesn't happen often. It's really hard to get a movie made, let alone that you really want it to be made that way. Yeah, let alone, you know, however many movies he's made now in double digits.
Not only does this film have the budget it has, it also is notorious for having 250 practical sets being used, some of them only being used for like a few seconds on screen. Like that's the airplane crash in this movie, that's a real set that they filmed on. Like that's pretty like wild to have a film that has 250 sets, practical sets on location shooting. This house is all real. None of it's a practical thing. You had not only that, you had the fact that you have this insane ensemble which features Royal Tenenbaum, who is the father figure, played by Gene Hackman. One of his last roles before he retires. You also have Angelica Houston playing his ex-wife, Danny Glover, Ben Stiller, Luke Wilson, Gwyneth Paltrow, Bill Murray, Owen Wilson, Leah Shepherd, and Alec Baldwin narrating.
Yeah.
Like, that's an insane cast.
That's a crazy cast that has like such an insane talent. And I mean, at this point, so many of them are like upper echelon of actors and actresses.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you look back at that. The person who's probably the least famous out of that crew is Luke Wilson, who's a pretty famous, well-known actor, who's had a lot of big comedies since Royal Tenenbaums. But anyway, going on to that, because we kind of need to move on from the film historian.
Yeah, let's get into this.
Well, let me say this one last fact, because I also think this is pretty opening. On its opening weekend in limited release, it grossed $276,000, which is kind of a low number, except that it did that while only playing in 5 theaters.
Whoa!
That means each theater, it was averaging about $55,000.
Wow. That's an impressive.
Crazy.
That's an impressive amount for 5
that's
theaters.
Wow. That's a crazy number for a limited release, which of course then allows it to go a lot more wide release when it comes out, because there's proof that there is a success and a buzz for this movie, which of course it then goes on to gross $70 million and goes on to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, written by Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson, This isn't just a Wes Anderson written movie. This is Owen Wilson's featured on it.
Yes.
It ends up losing that same year. Nominated with it is also, and I thought this was a pretty crazy lineup too. It loses to Gosford Park, which is kind of an indie black comedy. I believe it's a British comedy that ends up being the inspiration, I believe, for Downton Abbey. But it also is nominated along with Amelie, Memento, and Monsters Ball, which is kind of three big hitters of the 2001. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of crazy. And with that all said, let's kind of just get into
Hills.
What, yeah, like.
Shall we take a stand on our hills?
Yeah, at least for my stand, I think my hill relates very closely to who Wes Anderson is as a director.
Mm-hmm.
In that fact that I think what works so well about this movie is it's Anderson knowing exactly the movie he wants to make, and he casts the actors playing to their strength. I think that's a really impressive thing Anderson does, where he gets the actors and he doesn't ask like these things that they're not known for in their careers. They kind of play the characters that they've kind of been known for.
Right, and it makes the characters feel more natural and more like real people, even when there's sort of a caricature aspect to them. They still feel super grounded because it's cast so well.
Exactly,
and you know that probably is a testament to why Wes has certain actors and actresses that he will hire often.
Exactly.
Because
and with
he knows
that
how to
being
work with
said,
them.
My kind of more specific hill to die on is that in this huge ensemble cast, my favorite character and probably performance is Gwyneth Paltrow as Margot Tenenbaum, with Luke Wilson as Richie being right behind her. I love these two characters, and I love what Wes Anderson explores with them as individuals and together in this kind of weird, kind of just like almost uncomfortable way.
Yeah, it's very it's a totally uncommon sort of story of Richie and Margot.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting sort of situation to tackle. My hill for this film is that no one can tell a story with as much darkness yet still make it feel light like Wes Anderson can. And Royal Tenenbaums is a perfect example of that artistry. There's a lot of themes in this film that are really, really heavy, that are tough to see and tough to sort of grapple with. But there's always this overarching sense of levity in these stories, even though it's such broken people. A vast majority of them are such broken people in such profoundly different ways because of how their father is. It still feels light and funny at times. It's a really interesting balance to strike.
This film is all about balance in the fact that if it goes one way too far, I think you lose what makes this film so special, because this movie is basically all about the regrets and what we live with and failure and kind of this also arrested development. And basically it's these characters kind of learning to move past where they're stuck at in life. We meet each of these characters and they're all kind of at this really specific crossroads in their life. You know, you have Richie, this is the first time he's been back to see his family in, it seems like, a number of years, which also means it's the first time he's now had to kind of deal with his relationship with Margaret. Margot, sorry. You meet Chaz, who's played by Ben Stiller, who's, it sounds like, about a little less than a year since his wife and mother of their kids has passed. You meet Royal, who's at this weird place in the sense that, like, financially he's kind of ruined, and he has to pull this con. Angelica Houston at this point in her role as Etheline, where she now is in love with somebody, and then Margot in an unhappy marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's you meet all these characters right here, and it all just kind of goes from there, and you see them develop all with this overarching story of a lot of their trauma and issues relies on the fact that their patriarchy in their house disappeared on them and in many ways kind of screwed up.
Yeah. Yeah, the prologue of this film is broken up into chapters and narrated by Alec Baldwin.
Alec Baldwin. Very much feels like a book chapter. Like it does feel chapter to chapter.
Oh, it totally does.
Like to the point like he even like the art style in it is supposed to be each chapter opens up with the chapter of the book with the little illustrations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at the prologue, we see Chaz and Margot and Richie as children, and we kind of see sort of what their talents are and how they're all kind of geniuses in their own right.
Exactly.
Man, what an
they're
eclectic...
all prodigies.
Yeah, in different ways, and there's such an eclectic display of characters, and the style of cuts that's done is so unique and really adds these little snippets of characterization to them as well. And the bold captions sort of showing up during like B-roll sort of shots where they're showing the room that the child resides in, or the activity that they're doing. It explains what we're looking at in a really tongue-in-cheek sort of way, and also serves to like give these characters another foundation. Like you can tell a lot about a character by how their room is designed, and you can make it subtle, you can make it exactly the way that it needs to be, or you can make it so overly engineered it's like, okay, we're in a child's room. And this film is really unique in that it's not a typical room for a typical child.
Yeah,
Chaz,
it's the very
for instance,
whimsical feel.
Yeah, Chaz, for instance, is a business prodigy at the age of 12, and he has like a motorized tie rack in his room, and he's converted his room to like a sales floor with ticker tape running and old computer modems and UPS drivers coming in and out, and shelves and shelves of all these files. And that's just one example. And all of this wrapped up in just the warm, pastel, cheerful looking color scheme that Wes is so known for.
It feels almost fantasy-like in his kind of cinematography and set design. Right. And when we talked about the fact that this film has 250 actual sets used to film,
that's insane.
All the bedrooms and all the house is real. So it's all tangible. And I think that's such a genius idea because, so for instance, from my understanding, Gwyneth Paltrow only had about 10 days filming on set because she was, I think, filming something else. So she only had about a 10-day window that they could have her on set. What making that room and making that world so real is, as an actress, I feel like she's able to just kind of go in there and she gets to know everything about her character based on the tangibility of like what her childhood bedroom is. It almost feels like Wes Anderson sets this room where then the actors get to play in. So they get to learn their characters.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, it's like it's so wide and so focused.
Mm-hmm. Cinema as a whole has kind of manufactured this three-dimensional map almost in the collective mind of New York. So we like automatically, if we see something, there are always the monuments that we can identify. And then as we get these smaller sort of zoomed in slices, you can still kind of almost construct the city block around where we are. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just cinema. Something about, movies being set in New York. It's just interesting. And Wes takes that trope and still is able to sort of mess around with it. Like, it feels like a specifically storybook version of New York. There's a lot of there's a lot of aspects of literature that keep popping up in this film. The feel of it is very literary, and then, like you said, with dividing it up into prologues and chapters, that's very literary as well. And then the title cards that show up with each chapter have book text almost. It almost seems like script bylines or something there.
Yeah.
But it's
and
describing
it's like,
the scene.
This is clearly influenced, and Anderson has talked about himself, that this is a J.D. Salinger kind of novel, almost like come to life.
Yes, this movie was inspired by the writings of J.D. Salinger.
Yeah, and as someone who, I'm not the biggest fan of Catcher in the Rye, as I think I've stated before. It's not
I am also not big on Catcher in the Rye. Holden Caulfield is maybe one of the most annoying narrators.
Agreed. But you definitely see that style kind of carried on over here. And it's also interesting because not only do you see that style, you see the other styles that feel kind of influenced by Anderson. For instance, like, rewatching a bunch of Woody Allen's films recently, it definitely has that upper New York, Manhattan kind of the intellectual movement and surrealist comedy that's kind of associated with Allen and what he's doing in New York in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So you get to kind of see Wes Anderson play in this playground. And not only are talking about that, you're also talking about the music of Greenwich Village, which is it's literally throughout this movie. I mean, this soundtrack is amazing. It features Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, John Lennon and the Beatles, The Clash, The Ramones,
great
Velvet
soundtrack.
Underground, Nico, Vince Guaraldi Trio. It's just, it has a lot of it just like going for it. Elliott Smith's song in this movie is amazing. It has this certain style and feel to it that it's again, like, it could have gone so wrong, and I think it could have felt so pretentious, but it never feels disingenuine. It feels like this is just what these characters would listen to.
Yeah, I think that's something that happens a lot with pretentious film. Like, it starts to feel not genuine, but this one never feels ungenuine.
Exactly. Like, it keeps its, like, and I think the reason it does is because Anderson keeps its heart, like, in place, like, at the center of this movie. Because ultimately, this movie is about healing and acceptance.
Right.
And it's also to terms.
Yeah. And it's also not so, it's not so navel gazing that it can't laugh at itself. It can't have jokes, because there are funny moments in this. And in
it's
fact,
a great balance of jokes. It's like, it's not only like the lighthearted, the kind of absurdist, the surreal, the slapstick. It also takes it really dark at times. It is a whole plethora of humor on display.
Right. And it's not always present, but it is there enough that it breaks up what would otherwise be sort of a difficult movie to watch. If there wasn't those moments of comedy, if there wasn't those moments of absurdist humor, it would feel less genuine and less or I guess more pretentious.
I think what it also does is you have to kind of, if you don't have that humor, the character of Royal feels a lot more cruel.
Yeah.
Where with this humor, it kind of lightens it up, and it kind of gives you're not necessarily rooting for Royal, but it gives you this feeling, kind of like what Danny Glover says at the end of this movie when he's talking to Royal, where he's like, no, you're not an asshole, you're a son of a bitch. Like, it's that difference of, like, you have the charisma to, like, be this kind of good person in this life, which is why they kind of gravitate back to you. Like, you're not this just full-on terrible person. Because if you were this terrible, stubborn, like, person, they wouldn't be interested in you. Like, they wouldn't have any reason to still connect with you. But clearly they have some form of connection, even if it's in some case, like, Stiller puts a lot of his character is hating his father.
Yeah.
Like, he wouldn't, if it was the full on where his father's just the worst in everything and he really just ruined Chaz's life, it doesn't feel like Chaz would give him that kind of day to, like, because he would just be able to disconnect the bad and just throw it all away. But this is where it's that weird struggle of him where he's like, I love my father, and yet I resent who he is and who he was as a father figure in my life.
Mm-hmm. And with Chaz and Royal, the fact that Royal isn't some tyrant makes their relationship more interesting, because on the one hand you feel for Chaz, you know kind of what Royal has done to him in order to affect him so profoundly and to change sort of who he is. But then you also see how Royal has done some good. There are some good things that have come out of Royal's strange fatherhood.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, you just want them to understand each other, and that wouldn't be as satisfying of a storyline if Royal was just, like you said, or like the movie says, if he was just an asshole.
Yeah, and exactly. It's this thing where the three Tenenbaum children, they're all going through different things. Chaz is clearly resentful of his father. Richie has kind of learned to accept who his father is. And then
but
Margot,
Richie's problem more lies with his feelings and not really knowing how to get them out of his body.
Yeah, but his whole thing with his father
less.
definitely seems to be like, they seem to have the closest relationship out of all three of the children. There's an understanding that, like, okay, this is who my father is, and I can't
he was the
change
golden
him.
child.
Exactly. And then with Margot, it's just this, she almost just doesn't know who her father is. So she kind of just accepts this character in her life isn't her father, to the point that, like, her father doesn't even know her middle name, even though it's the name of his mother.
Yes. And
which comes up later.
To that end, Margot is the one adopted child in the Tenenbaum family.
Which, as the movie points out, it's something that Royal has to point out to people. Like, this isn't my actual child, which it's hard to tell where that comes from. It's obviously, in the movie, it's kind of done as a joke, but it also
that's one of those dark, absurd sort of jokes.
But it also, what it's so good about it is having that dark, absurdist joke. It also shows, like, kind of the trauma that's now been placed on Gwyneth Paltrow's character, where, like, that deeply affected her growing up.
Yeah, she had, and even though she's, I would say, probably one of the most sad characters, especially at the beginning. At the more in the later half of the movie, I would say Richie sort of takes that spot. But Margot, even though her character is quite sad and you just want her to sort of find the light on the other side of this whole thing, her deadpan delivery is really funny.
Like I said, I think what Gwyneth Paltrow does in this movie is, it's by far my favorite performance I've ever seen from her, because I'm not the biggest Paltrow fan.
I am also not the biggest Paltrow fan, especially recently with her strange business endeavors, selling snake oil.
I will admit, obviously, it's hard to deny her talent. And I mean, even in, like, some of her more mainstream work, like the MCU, those moments with Pepper and Tony feel very genuine. But I think what this movie shocked me with seeing her is, one, it feels like a completely different character that we've ever seen Margot's the character that we've ever seen Paltrow play. And it's also one who kind of just has this allure and mystery that it kind of feels like Gwyneth Paltrow you don't associate with, like, she kind of feels like the it girl, when Paltrow has never really, I felt like, to me, the it girl. Like, she's always been, like, kind of the personality, but in this, she's almost plays like what I would say is almost similar to an Angelina Jolie, where she's so mysterious.
Yeah, it's definitely strange, because so often Gwyneth Paltrow is just like the icon of, wow, she's just so beautiful. And I mean, I'm not going to deny that, but it's not in the same way that, like the Megan Fox was during,
The
early Transformer
Transformers
time
film.
or
Yeah.
something like that. It's not the same sort of uh, labeling, I guess.
Yeah.
And, I don't think it's great that people label label famous people as those certain things. But it is an interesting role
It's
for her
for
to
me,
take.
she plays the character that I think is so against type to what these other characters are. Because a lot of these characters kind of feel like archetypes of the characters played in their past. Gene Hackman feels like kind of a typical Gene Hackman performance, obviously a little bit more comedic than
Hmm.
some of his other performances, but he still has this kind of charisma to him, this ultimate charm, kind of this deceitfulness. He is kind of like, as Danny Glover's character describes him, he is the son of a bitch in this thing. Like, he is just like, he's the ultimate scoundrel. It kind of feels like he's the
Yeah.
mischievous scoundrel this whole movie,
Hmm.
and
I what do
that
you I
character is
want to
very
know
similar.
I want to know what you think of Angelica Houston's character, which
I
is Ev oh shoot,
Evelyn,
I could
or sorry, Etheline,
Ethylene. Yeah, thank you.
Ethel
Ethel is
Tenenbaum.
what they
Yeah,
call it. I
Ethel.
couldn't remember. I was
I
like, I know it
so
sounds like a fuel for a lantern or something.
It's so weird because when I remember seeing this film in 16, I kind of remember not liking her character. And I think
Hmm.
I've always had a memory of her of kind of being more of the pretentious, uptight mother. She's not
Hmm.
that role in this movie.
No.
She is a fairly loving, caring mother who, of course, is full of her eccentricities just as the rest of the Tenenbaum family is. But she's a
Hmm.
lot more nurturing and loving. And what I love about this performance that Angelica Houston brings to it is there's a balance of just something that I don't think emotion is always captured well, where it's her, like for instance, the scene that I'm referencing is the scene where she thinks Royal is dying,
Hmm.
and she has such vivid, true, strong reactions where she simultaneously like hates this person, but also grieves
She's
for
crushed
what her
at the
death.
Yeah, she's crushed at the prospect of Royal no longer being alive.
Yeah, it's this balance that I think this movie does so well, where it's these relationships are complicated. She does have this relationship with Royal that means a lot to her. And the
Hmm.
idea of him being not in this world is one that scares her. I like a lot of the choices Angelica Houston does in this movie, specifically when you see her get to have some of those lighter moments with Danny Glover's character as Henry Sherman, who I think
Yes.
provides a lot of the sanity to this world
Hmm.
because he feels like a pretty grounded, normal character in
Yeah.
here. He gets to provide a lot of the laughter of this movie. One of my
Yeah,
favorite
and
big.
often at Royal's expense, which is sort of cathartic, especially when he is being more when he's leaning more towards the a-hole side of his personality
Mhm,
than the SOB side of his personality. It feels good
exactly.
to for Sherman to put him in his place and to like call him out. Like, you're
And
not
Sherman
being a good
also,
father right now.
he gets to have a few of those moments as well where it is just him getting to break kind of the tension in this. One of my favorite jokes,
Hmm.
pratfalls of this movie, is literally when him and Angelica Houston are walking in the construction site and
Yeah,
he
and he
just
falls
falls
into the
off
pit.
screen, and you
It's
just see
so
the next
funny.
scene, you don't actually see him fall. He's just kind of dusting himself off nonchalantly out of the pit. It's a really funny comedic moment, which again, it's that thing where Wes Anderson is able to just kind of bring a kind of lesser joke. It kind of feels like, not lesser, but a very kind of simple, kind of embodied of like what the Chaplins used to do, where it's a very
Hmm.
slapstick joke compared to some of the whimsical, funny, witty dialogue he's bringing. It's like it's that great balance between the two.
Hmm.
There's a lot of it that I like. Like I said, I think what Anderson does so well in this film is casting people to play versions of themselves so that they feel he knows how to use them and they are playing to their strengths. Ben Stiller's character feels like a very typical Ben Stiller character, just a little bit more eccentric and a little bit more complicated. But I mean, he's doing
Yeah,
kind of the same Ben Stiller kind of comedic bits that you would expect from a Stiller and kind of
sort
embodying
of the
what you'd see.
he's sort of the craziness factor where I mean his whole I guess his sort of Royal Tenenbaum given flaw is that he is well I it's sort of caused by that and more so caused by the death of his wife in a plane crash, but he's so concerned with the safety of his boys and his own safety. So later on, when Royal sort of takes Chaz's boys, Ari and Uzi, I think are their names,
Yeah.
and sort of tears up the town with them, it's all of these feelings of like, Dad, you never did that with me. Also, that's not safe. Also, that's irresponsible.
Mhm.
So it's like you understand the anger and the sort of feelings that he has. It's not just he's being loud because it's funny. It's he's
Yeah.
being loud because he is this traumatized character, but it's not so dark that it's I sort of lost my train of thought there.
No,
But
I get what you're
I hope
saying.
I hope you see what I'm
What's
saying.
really interesting about it is, again, that idea where we talked about a post 9/11 movie, where
Mhm.
I think Chaz's character is maybe one of the easier characters to write for audiences like post 9/11. One, losing your wife in a plane crash is
Mhm.
just sadly something New Yorkers at that time, that was a reality for
They knew
them.
that all too
Just
well,
like
yeah.
all of a sudden, like a loved one not showing up home. Like that
Mhm.
was just something that obviously was going to hit closer in
Right.
this kind of thing. And also this, I think, paranoid feeling of it. Just like this, just like fear of just like, I can't let this happen, so I have to take every precaution to keep my children safe. I think that was a real fear coming post 9/11, especially those first few months where it's like, I'm going to do everything to protect my family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
There's
I
yeah.
think that's why Ben Stiller's character really has a lot of charm and why his character is kind of the one that it feels like there's a very specific like audience love for this movie, and I think Ben Stiller's is definitely one of the ones. One because, and a thing that we haven't talked about is how amazing the costuming is for this movie because it really brings those characters further to life. I think
Mhm.
Ben Stiller, just in the way he's designed and just what that character is going through, feels very relatable. Where the other two Tenenbaum stories, while you connect with them and there's a lot of sweetness in them, it's a little bit more eccentric that you don't really get to connect with them quite as much as you would empathize for what Ben Stiller's character is going through in this movie.
Yeah. I with Chaz, I think something that's brilliant about his costuming is I think it's similar to the concept of a lot of professionals will wear the same thing every day because that's one less thing that they have to think about. And so they
Mm-hmm.
can devote that bandwidth that would otherwise be used for picking out their clothing. They can devote that to other things. And for Chaz, who is so neurotic about everything, wearing the same sort of tracksuit, I'm assuming that it's not the exact same tracksuit, but he's got multiple sets of the same. Him
Yes,
wearing that every day is one less thing for him to worry about.
exactly.
And that
And
and that's a really subtle nod to what his character is. And then another
it's
another
also kind of,
costuming choice
sorry,
with
before
is
you
with
jump into
Richie.
that one,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
what with Chaz's outfit, it also kind of shows him stuck in a time and place where he can't
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
move
yeah.
forward. I think that's another key with understanding why he wears the same outfit. It's a symbolic choice of him not moving forward.
Yes, and that's really similar. That's exactly what I was going to say about Richie.
Mm-hmm.
Because for
Richie has
most of
that.
the movie, Richie is wearing the same thing. He's got sort of the same style going on with his hair and his facial hair. And he's got that same sweatband that he's had since he was a kid. He's always wearing sort of the tennis blazer. He's always wearing the sort of tennis sort of crop shorts and the high-rise socks. He's always wearing that sort of same thing because he's stuck in the past of when he used to be this athletic god kid
Mhm.
who was a star tennis player, and that's a really interesting thing. What's something? Did you notice anything with Margot's costuming by chance?
I think Margot's costuming, one besides just kind of being this iconic look, I
Hmm.
think what hers does so well is just even the way her like hair is parted kind of hides a part of herself, right? Like it doesn't feel like
Right.
she's comfortable ever in like what she wears, who she is. And I think
Hmm.
that's a little bit displayed in the sense that like what the type of clothing she chooses to wear, where it's a little bit looser because she's not as comfortable in her like own body and sexuality
Yeah,
as
it's
it
something.
almost like it's almost like repressed in some way, but also just like again, just like not wanting to show people who she is behind this. So she kind of wears it as this facade almost.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, we've just approached an hour or
Yeah.
so of
Let,
recording time, so we should probably start wrapping up fairly soon.
yeah, let's start like hitting some of the main points of this movie, it feels like,
Hmm.
when we're talking about some of these characters. Because we haven't actually touched much on the story of, Royal basically abandoning his kids. They haven't heard from him, and it sounds like about
Hmm.
7 years. He comes back all their life, makes up this lie that he's dying and he has 6 weeks to live to kind of get back in the Tenenbaum family. It brings them all back together under the same roof for a first time in what it seems like since they were children, and then it just kind of explores it from there. There's certain moments that I really think are special in this movie. One of them being the when the character of Richie gets to see Margot again, right
Yeah,
when he comes out of the
when she
airport
comes out of the bus.
and she comes out of the bus. One, it's the use of music, like I said, is a really important, impeccable choice that Anderson does, and he uses the singer Nico, who is a woman who has this very unique, unusual voice that is,
Hmm.
like I said, she releases this album in the 1960s with the Velvet Underground, which is Lou Reed's band, and she has
Hmm.
this very kind of like not
And Velvet
raspy, but
Underground is
just
also featured in this film.
they are. And like I said, what her voice shows is it kind of embodies the whole like unusualness of their situation. It's something beautiful. It almost at times feels a little inaccessible, and I almost don't know how to
It's
describe it,
the
but it
it's
really
the it's the forbidden love sort of concept, and the weirdness of this particular forbidden love is sort of
yeah,
all
it's
wrapped
her
up
voice is
in
so
that moment.
unique that it feels like you can't have it or it's something very specific, which I think embodies what Richie is feeling in that moment, seeing someone that he loved. This is a point of the movie that we haven't really talked about, and I still don't know how I fully feel about it. Is of course the Richie and Margot kind of love story in this
Yeah.
movie. This is one of the interesting parts, and it's one of the reasons I want to the movie comes out when I wanted to talk about Licorice Pizza because that
Yes.
film's been marred with controversy with the fact that Alana Haim's character is 25, Cooper Hoffman's character is 15 in the movie. Like
Hmm.
it's that 10-year age difference. This one is taboo, very much similar as
Right.
well. Now, not as maybe noticeable as the Licorice Pizza one, and one that Anderson establishes really early on by kind of reminding the audience that she's
Margot Robbie.
Margot's Margot's character is the adopted, so it's not directly incest,
Yes.
but obviously it's still, and as what's it called, as Gene Hackman's character points out, it's still like people are going to frown upon it. I forgot
Yeah. He
exactly what his
says.
line is.
He
Where he's like,
says.
no, it's not illegal, but
Yeah.
it's not looked upon well.
Yeah. But at the same time, he's also like, I follow where you're being led. So it's an interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure how I felt about that.
I
And
think what
my
the
wife and I
movie's
watched this. my wife and I watched this together, and
Did
at
she like this
first,
movie?
yeah, she did.
Okay, I was curious if she would.
I figure that she would. I knew that this would be one that she could at least watch with me. That wouldn't be like I wouldn't make her watch The Rock with me. But this one, I think she did enjoy, and that was one of the aspects of the film that was like tough for us to at first grasp and sort of get behind. But the
I
more
think
it
it's
went
intentional
on,
too.
yeah. And then another aspect of that whole story that was hard for us to grasp onto was what happens later on with Richie
Mm.
when he and Raleigh, who is Bill Murray's character and Margot's husband, I mean, they sort of hire a PI and they get a whole background report on Margot and stricken by grief and sort of the sort of crashing down of all of these different feelings that he has. Richie shaves his head and his face and attempts suicide by cutting his wrists.
Yeah. And I have a lot of thoughts on this suicide scene.
Yes.
Touching on, I think, why the Margot Ritchie story ultimately didn't bother me as much is because I think it's really important in kind of understanding this family dynamic, which is so eccentric, so weird. But it also, I think it does a really good job in showing that none of these three are really siblings, it kind of feels like. They're all individuals who kind of lived in the same household and have these shared experiences, but they don't seem close in the fact of like they have the typical brother sister upbringing. It almost at times kind of feels like none of them are, they're all kind of parents and brothers and sisters to each other because they didn't have any kind of like real like family dynamic in their lives.
Almost,
like they're all just like doing their own things, and it's almost like they're sponsored by the Tenenbaum parents.
Yeah, they feel like roommates
almost, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. What I was gonna say, you reminded me of something. There's this phrase that says "no man is an island," which is basically like saying that a person, it doesn't do a person well to be alone, but within this family they are kind of an island, and even within their own sort of relationships outside of being a part of the Tenenbaum family, they're all sort of islanders in their own right. Chaz with his kids, they have this strange proto trainee sort of relationship, and Margot has made herself extremely distant from her husband of Raleigh, and Richie, his best friend Eli Cash, who is Owen Wilson's character, who we haven't touched on too much.
Yeah, I know. We'll jump into a second.
Yeah,
because I was just thinking, because that brings up a point that when you're talking about right there, it's the kind of outsiders looking in, which is embodied through Eli's character, and actually for a lot of the film, Royal's character. They have that one scene together where Eli says, which is Owen Wilson's character, "I always wanted to be a Tenenbaum," to which Royal responds, "Yeah, me too."
Yeah, me too.
Like that's kind of one of those scenes that hits hard because it's the point of this relationship. Royal doesn't actually realize like how much this lack of family means to him, and actually how crushing it is to him that he doesn't have a relationship with his family.
Yeah, and then on the other side of that, Eli, he sees the Tenenbaums and how they all used to be these genius kids, and how interesting their life was and how many things were going on. And he has this view of, the grass is greener on the other side. And even as a successful author in his own right, even though he has mixed reviews, the character of Eli Cash is a successful author who gets sort of bad reviews, but his books sell well.
Yeah.
He has this perception that the grass is greener on the Tenenbaum side. And that makes his sort of drug struggles later on in the film interesting because you wonder if that's a sort of coping mechanism for
it
this
feels
sort
very
of untreated, unmetered sort of coveting of what these kids had, and
he wants
in
so
reality,
badly to be a Tenenbaum, like to the point that he's going to Angelica Houston's character and basically seeking her
approval. Yes, that's an
It's-
interesting little tidbit as well.
I think Owen Wilson actually does quite a lot with very little in this movie, where one, he provides the comedy in spades in this movie. This character like is pretty hysterical. He has one line in it that I think is great. It's I wrote it down. It's, well, everyone knows Custer died at Little Bighorn. What this book presupposes is maybe he didn't. He has like the weirdest like cowboy like look to him.
Yeah.
Just like
sort of the I'm wearing these dusters and these chaps and this hat because I needed an image, and this is the image that I have decided to go with.
It's kind of the whole thing where each of the Tenenbaums have their own distinct style. That he needs to kind of have his own distinct style, and the difference is his style feels so poor, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I want to share. One of the quotes that I really enjoyed. This one's from Royal himself, and he also provides a lot of the jokes.
Funny lines
in
this movie.
One of my favorites is, "Oh, you're a homeowner. Lovely. I used to be a homeowner too until my son expropriated from me." It's like that's such a strange. That's such a strange concept for your son.
He doesn't seem to understand like what should be said in situations. It's kind of like the whole thing. Like,
right.
One of my favorite lines he has is the one where he says, "I'm very sorry for the loss of your mother. She was a terribly attractive woman."
Yeah.
I think that line's hysterical and it's totally
She's a
inappropriate.
Terribly attractive woman. It's like, oh.
And even in like the first scene, we get that right away with who Royal's character is when the kids ask, is it their fault that they're getting the divorce? And he's like, no, I mean, of course, certain sacrifices had to be made.
Yeah, but no,
like
it's not your fault. It's like,
it was just like the worst thing to say to a child.
Why even bring that up?
I think, like I said, it kind of pictures it. And it's one of my favorite just performances Gene Hackman provides because he balances what the movie is intended to, where he has to balance the comedic with the dramatic and the heart of this movie. If Royal doesn't work, a lot of this movie doesn't work. And you have to buy into his redemption. It's a really important scene is the scene where he and Danny Glover's character, Henry Sherman, have this fight in the middle of the kitchen where Hackman's basically throwing not racial slurs, but it's very racially motivated kind of like attacks at Henry Sherman's character.
Because
it doesn't feel like he's a racist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just
not,
desperation
like...
to wound this other person who is taking, quote unquote, taking his wife.
His family, basically becoming what he wants. And Danny Glover seems to understand that. It's just like, this guy's like attacking me, but for very different, like it's not out of racism, it's fully out of just like this guy's kind of almost weird ego trip where he can't allow me to exist in this world. And it eventually accumulates in the scene where Henry Sherman realizes Royal's lying. Royal has another great line when he gets discovered here, where he's just like, this taught me everything. Like, I have a new chance at life. And Luke Wilson's character is like, Dad, you were never really dying. There's so many scenes in there. And one character that I want to touch on before we kind of get into the third act of this film, which kind of takes the darkest note in this film, is a character we haven't mentioned a lot yet, is Ralph St. Clair, which is Bill Murray's character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Raleigh St. Clair is an interesting...
He doesn't get as much to do in this movie as, per se, other Bill Murray, Wes Anderson appearances.
Right, it's not The Life Aquatic.
He's a very supporting character in this movie.
In more ways than one.
Yeah, he's there really to show us who Margot is with and without him.
Yeah.
Like, his purpose is kind of to enhance Margot's story. He has this
and to draw attention to the sort of trauma that Margot is dealing with. Like he is trying to help her, and she is just not receptive, or she doesn't want to be helped by him specifically. And I mean, I think that's sort of an accurate, as far as I'm aware. And if I'm incorrect, please do correct me. Either you, Ben, or listeners, send me a DM. I'd love to know more about this, but I feel like it's a fairly realistic depiction of what depression can be like sometimes.
I think so too.
Where even
and I think
even when people are offering you help, it's just there's just not the motivation there to receive that help.
She feels stuck. Her character of Margot feels really just trapped, and she's just kind of accepted this arrested development she's in, where this is her life and this is how she's going to live it, and she really at this point doesn't care. Of course, until Luke Wilson's character comes back and starts confessing some of those feelings. This Luke Wilson scene that we mentioned earlier, the suicide attempt, is a brutal scene to witness.
Yeah,
it's a heartbreaking scene. It's probably the best acted scene in this movie. Just for what he goes through, the shaving of his head, kind of getting to see Luke Wilson and what we kind of know as the Luke Wilson look. Very much like, okay, that's what Luke Wilson looks like. To the point where he's cutting off his hair. He has the line like, "Tomorrow I die," or something.
It was sort of that scene was sort of similar to the Village Square scene in Jojo Rabbit a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's a very stark look.
Yeah, it's a very stark. It's this. I can't find. Where's my?
It's where the movie takes. This scene is kind of where the movie takes another dimension of what it is.
Yeah.
Like if this scene doesn't happen, it's a lot more whimsical and humorous. I feel like the film becomes.
This
scene
really
is where
draws attention. Draws attention to the more somber aspects, and even with that, it's so beautifully and somberly shot. Like the lighting is this strong tungsten light, and the cheery music going on still with
Elliott Smith's Needle in the Hay.
Needle in the Hay. In the
this
background.
It's heartbreaking to watch.
Man,
the sequence so I think realistic, uncomfortable, and honestly, it just the whole scene kind of feels like it's done out of a whim, because it kind of feels like that's what his suicide attempt is. It doesn't feel like there's much contemplation in it. It's he's in this moment of just true pain, and the only pain he feels like is an escape, and the consequences of that action don't quite have the weight to it. And it's like I said, it's this really dark scene, which is then again juxtaposed by a really comedic scene in the next one, where all the family's there at the hospital, and Ben Stiller just has one of these lines.
Dark comedy about the suicide note.
Yeah, where he's just like, he's like, can we read the suicide note? No,
I don't.
Can we paraphrase it?
Yeah, can you paraphrase your suicide note?
Yeah.
It's like,
and
whoa.
Ben Stiller's like, is it dark? Wilson's like, of course it's dark. It's a suicide
note. Yeah, that's one of those sort of absurd jokes where not a lot of people would joke about it, but in the moment it feels appropriate. It
feels real,
all
right?
Of these, it feels real, and it feels appropriate because it's all these characters that aren't fully able to have these solid human connections for one reason or another. So it really does feel like it was earned, and it adds. And because Richie survives this, the levity of this whole scene feels less. You don't feel as uncomfortable laughing with them. It's sort of a relief. It's sort of that sigh of relief, like
it's
I'm
that
so
moment
glad
that
you're
breaks
okay.
the tension.
Yeah, and it's nice because Richie is almost sort of not laughing along with them, but he's contributing to the sort of absurd funniness of that whole scene.
And this is the very critical point, because this is then the next scene where Richie leaves the hospital and he meets up with Margot's character in his tent in his room, and this is where they kind of just confess, their love for each other. And Margot's character ends it basically by saying, "We can never be together."
Mm-hmm.
Like, this love will always have to be secret, which is another very somber note, which then gives it the precedent to then have the Royal Tenenbaums scene with his son, where he's kind of giving him the advice, which then kind of leads to the redemption, it feels like, of Royal, right? Because he gets to have this scene where, one, he panics when he thinks his son's dead, rushes to the hospital, basically willing to break into the hospital, which then leads to this great side performance from the...
And something that he's done right before breaking into the hospital, he and his co-conspirator and kind of lying to the family... Oh, I can't remember what his name
Pagoda?
is. It's Pagoda. Yeah, Pagoda.
Pagoda. He has this great scene where he just points and he's like, "That's Richie." It's Richie climbing into the bus.
There he is. But they
where he
before
stabs,
that whole scene,
where
they,
he stabs
they became
Royal.
Yes.
I swear, if you stab me again, this is the last time you'll ever stab me.
The right before the whole suicide scene, they've become doormen for like elevator operators and Royal is doing it to sort of prove that he is good for something. Like he is working and sort of trying to prove in his own strange way that like there is something that he's trying to do for them.
Yeah, and it's because it's all stems from this moment where it's kind of Gene Hackman and Alec Baldwin teaming up, where it's these 6 days have been the best days of my life, which then Alec Baldwin reveals like in the monologue going on, where he's like, and at this moment, Royal actually realized that is true.
Yes,
because he says it as a lie.
As he said it. Yeah, he realized as he said it that it was true.
It's a form of manipulation, which he then realizes he's manipulating himself to be lying about this condition, which, like I said, this whole scene kind of gets him to have this redemption moment under Richie's eye, which then lets him have this kind of heartfelt conversation with Margot's character, where they're all surrounded at this ice cream parlor with fathers and daughters having ice cream, and he gets to have these lines, and there's just this understanding of like, Margot's like, "You were never my father because you didn't treat me like your daughter at any point in your life. Like, you don't even know my middle name, and it's your literal mother's name." And it's kind of this understanding where he's like, "Okay, yeah, I've been kind of a terrible father." Like, why would you consider me a father figure?
It's this weird moment where he is trying to do something for her, and even then it's like, that's not what you're doing. While your head's in the right place, it's not nearly enough to repair this damage.
Yeah, and which is something, his whole arc in that scene is understanding he can never repair that damage. It's just he can now be there and try. Like, that's that moment where he realizes, like, she realizes he actually cares about me, is that moment where it's like, he's trying. Even if he's failed my entire life, at this moment he cares about me and is trying to make the difference, which kind of allows her to open up with him. Which then comes, of course, the redemption under Chaz's eyes, because Chaz is really it's the yin and yang the whole time with Royal, where Royal and Chaz are basically like, they don't see eye to eye, and Chaz dislikes his father vehemently. Leading to the scene, of course, where the wedding happens at Henry Sherman's, and Ethel's. This crazy car crash happens with Owen Wilson's character, where he's just like Eli out of his mind, drugged
Here
out of
I
his
come.
mind. Yeah, just crashes in, kills the dog in a very darkly comedic moment.
Almost hits Chaz's kids, which results in a very funny chase scene.
Yeah, yes. Royal saves them.
Yes, Royal saves the kids, and it also results in a very funny chase.
One of the funniest chase scenes in the movie, where they throw the pastor, where they throw
the priest
starts
bumping down the stairs, and Chaz like grabs Eli and like pushes him very slowly over a wall, and he just lands on the other side of the wall. Yeah, and then that's finally the moment where Eli realizes, I need help with this addiction that I have.
Yeah, and it's also this moment where when
not to
Royal
rush us
saves,
along, not to rush us along. Let's try to finish pretty quickly here.
Yeah, this is my last point of the movie. Really.
We're approaching 9 p.m.
Ooh, we are getting late. This is my last kind of point of the movie because it kind of feels like the last scene in this movie is where Royal and Chaz have their reconciliation, and it's one of the sweetest lines in the movies where it's, "I've had a rough year, Dad." Like it's kind of all the weight of just like he's lost his wife,
and you can hear his voice quavering and breaking.
Yeah, and Royal understands and comforts his son for the first time, really at what it feels like their life, where it's he's coming to him as a father, and he's now comforting him as a father.
Yeah, and Royal really does earn his redemption, and then
when
later
he
on,
passes, it's a sweet moment with these characters where they get to look back on him fonder and as a family rather than what they were, where it was a bunch of individuals.
Where they were
this
fragmented.
Kind of bastard father.
Yes, and there's a my final thought on the film, the detail of Chaz being the one in the ambulance when his father dies, and how he was with him when his father dies is a really nice, bittersweet sort of apotheosis of Royal's arc with Chaz specifically.
And Chaz gets this moment where it's comedic and showing the character moving forward, where while they're at the funeral, he is wearing a black Adidas sweatpants suit to like show honor, which obviously you wear black at a funeral. So that's the joke right there, which is kind of another absurdist, like weird thing.
Vaguely apropos.
But it's also that moment where we see Chaz is able to kind of move on because the rest of the characters are dressed in their usual attires.
Yes. So
for him to be dressed in black is not only him respecting his father, but him also
on the
branching
road to,
out.
Yeah. I'll say what my favorite bit was, and then we can go into our great debate. I really want what Royal had on his tombstone, on my tombstone. It says, died tragically rescuing his family from the wreckage of a destroyed, sinking battleship. Now, I didn't realize how poignant that was until just reading it before I said it out loud. But in a way, the Tenenbaum family was kind of a sinking ship.
Yeah, it was. They were no longer kind of feeling like a family, and this is them reconciliating.
Yeah, and in a strange way, Royal really did save his family because in the end, he actually started trying.
Kind of, right?
Yes, in the end, while he was lying, he was just being classic Royal, but the deeper he got into the lie, and then later on, he actually started giving.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And so while a very funny line on the surface, there's also a nice little bonus meaning in there. And I don't know to what degree that was planned, but I love it and I appreciate that detail all the same.
Yeah, there's a lot, like I said, we didn't touch on this movie. The fact that there's hints that Margot
it's so
might be
story dense.
Yeah, there's like hints that Margot might be bisexual in it. There's a few other
the whole scene set with, to Judy is a punk by the Ramones.
Like there's a ton
that scene
going
is
on
really funny.
It's really good.
Funny.
That's one of my favorite scenes. Is like that joke.
Me as well.
I think my favorite joke in this movie is the one I said earlier, where it's the scene where Danny Glover's character takes the pratfall. I think that scene's just. I think Danny Glover kills it in this movie. I think he delivers a lot of the heart, as does Alec Baldwin, who doesn't get talked about as much because he's the narrator. I think he brings a lot to this movie. But ultimately, the scene that, like, if I'm saying, like, this is my favorite scene of this movie, it is actually the scene where Ben Stiller and Gene Hackman have their reconciliation at the end of the movie. I think it's the sweetest and the one with the most heart, just because also Royal's offer, like, bringing them the dog. Like, kind of like...
Oh, yeah, that was sweet,
It's like a really sweet moment where he's like, okay, this guy actually cares about my kids. And wants their best interest.
And immediately takes a big step to fix a mistake.
Exactly. And with that all said, Royal Tenenbaums, really great movie. Don't remember it being quite as good when I was younger, so the fact that I got to see this movie again and rewatch it with obviously more mature eyes, I
Mhm.
really had fun with.
This
Uh,
is a movie that benefits you thinking about it after the fact too.
this is a movie where I've always criticized the PG 13 R rating
Mm-hmm.
because this movie is rated R. It doesn't hit until you're a little bit older, till you're a little
Right.
bit more educated, till you've had a little bit more life experience and things. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that you can't be like 16 and enjoy this movie, but I think this one is one of those ones that benefits more. Where even if it is you're allowed to see this movie technically in theaters at 17, I think this movie's a little bit more meaningful the older you get.
Yeah, with a critical eye for sure.
Yeah, and with
So
that, that's our thoughts on the Royal Tenenbaums. Really well done movie, and well deservingly puts Wes Anderson on the map.
yes, and I think it's
This is his
about
Pulp
time.
Fiction. Yeah, this is his Pulp
I
Fiction.
think
You ready?
I think it's about time for
For
our classic, our classic here,
the
great
debate. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Great Debate. I am your host, Ben Friedman, and standing in this corner at 6'1", 175 pounds, glasses and all, Branson Bind Media.
Glasses and all, punch him right off my face.
Delicado. And
Here I
in this
am.
corner, in his bedroom floor,
Making waves
in
and
his
making
parents'
waveforms.
house, in his parents' house, standing at 6 feet, exactly weighing about 50 more pounds than he would wish to weigh at this moment. Ben, the Beniverse Friedman.
How far away are you from the mic?
Maybe less than a foot.
Okay, you got really
Oh.
quiet for some reason.
Oh,
I
did
don't know
really?
why.
That's
I don't know. At
That's
least
like the
in
first time I've ever had that.
yeah, at least on my end.
It's probably
Maybe
performance issues.
maybe
Happens 1 in 3.
maybe it automatically cut your volume. In any
Maybe.
case, me first.
Welcome to the
Me
Great
first.
Debate. Yeah, you go first.
Okay, I'm pretty proud of this one.
Mhm.
So this movie has quite the ensemble cast, as we discussed. Quite a few of them, Wes Anderson regulars, as we also
Yes.
discussed. And then each of the cast members also has a large number of roles under each of their respective belts.
Mhm.
So I want to know, Ben, what other role of any cast member would be the most interesting / strangest one to swap in this movie? So, for example, instead of Gene Hackman portraying Royal Tenenbaum in this movie, Gene Hackman plays another role from a different movie that he was in.
Yeah, I get
That's
the
sort
question.
of the structure.
I think, I don't know why this was my first answer, but I'm sticking with it. I'm choosing Ben Stiller, and I recast him as the character Derek Zoolander. Derek Zoolander Tenenbaum, I guess is what we're going to call him in this movie. And it's weird because it fits kind of in this weird way. They're each 3 prodigies. And in the movie Zoolander, directed by Ben Stiller, we are supposed to believe he is the world's greatest model. Like, he's famous for his blue steel, all of that thing. So you get to have this other kind of prodigy in New York in 2001. Weirdly enough, another film that Zoolander is the first comedy that comes out post 9/11 on September, I believe, 28, 2001. Which, so you get that connection. But I think what it is one, there's a comedic sensibility that works between these 2 movies. Now, Ben Stiller's Zoolander is obviously more broadly comedic, but I think
much different kind of comedy.
Yeah, but I think they can translate well enough, and you get to see a character that is already eccentric by nature in Derek Zoolander. You kind of get to transform him into this role of Royal Tenenbaums, get to see kind of the more prodigy side of Derek Zoolander. Again, another character in this film who has father issues with his father, I believe, played by John Voight in Zoolander. I think there's enough crossover that you would kind of get to see it, and I think would fit really well. And I think the broad comedic would add a lot to this movie. Not saying it'd be a better movie, but I think it would translate into a way that it still fits the Royal Tenenbaum structure and what this film's message is supposed to be, while also respecting also respecting what Ben Stiller's Zoolander is. They both can kind of coexist in this New York meta just absurdist world.
Instead of breeding Dalmatian mice, he breeds ants.
Yeah.
What is this?
Ants.
A breeding room for ants?
For ants.
All right, I've got an interesting answer that I think might actually one up yours for most interesting swap.
Okay. Wait, can
Owen
I guess
Wilson.
which characters? Okay, I was gonna say Owen Wilson. Can I guess the character Owen Wilson? Can I guess the character Owen Wilson is?
Yes.
I'm gonna say Lightning McQueen.
You're absolutely right. Swap Owen Wilson as Eli Cash with Owen Wilson as Lightning McQueen.
The car crash scene would be like,
oh my, that's
exactly
what I was thinking. Like the car crash scene by itself would be extremely absurd.
It'd be so funny,
but it's so funny. And then also just the visual of all the rest of the characters being like semi-grounded, like normal people, and then Owen Wilson's just a race car.
Yeah, I like it.
Who's
I
addicted to ketamine.
Yeah,
it's like
I like the idea. It shows the real side of Lightning McQueen, like what the real celebrities go through on a daily basis, and what fame can do to take it
exactly.
on. Here's my question for you:
Lightning McQuetamine.
In this film, we get to see characters or actors who have had a relationship with Wes Anderson in his film. The Wilson brothers, Murray, I believe Alec Baldwin's appeared, maybe a few others that I'm forgetting, but anyway, you get to see these character actors who get to appear. I want you to cast 3 actors or actresses that haven't been in a Wes Anderson movie that you can think of. Put them in it, kind of in the lead or supporting like roles. What 3 actors would you like to see play in the world of a Wes Anderson movie?
One that immediately came to mind as one that would fit in well, I think, is William H. Macy.
Okay.
Now, I don't think I would want him to play the same sort of character as he does in Fargo, but I could see him starting out as more of a Weasley character and then sort of calming down as the movie goes on. I almost like how Kevin Spacey's character was in Baby Driver, where it's sort of like you don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy. It's whatever's kind of benefiting him. It's almost like an anti-hero, but in a much less superhero, supervillain kind of way. Another actor that I think might work, or actress. I'll let you share a few, and then I'll share some more.
I'll list off one, and then you can kind of jump.
Okay.
In. I had as my number 1 was Tom Hiddleston.
That'd be interesting.
I think the relationship that Owen Wilson and him already have is kind of a natural fit, and I think
they're great together in Loki.
And they're also in Woody Allen's film Midnight in Paris together.
Oh.
So I think they have a natural relationship that would translate on screen, and I think there's kind of like this almost eccentric look with Hiddleston's character that I think would translate pretty well over to it, and I think he has fun with that kind of whimsical dialogue where he gets to be the witty character. So that's one of my pitches.
That's pretty good.
I have the other 2, so
I was
tell
trying
me
to
if
think
you
of
need me
an
to go.
actress. One that I thought of was Ellie Fanning.
Okay.
I'm thinking of her from We Bought a Zoo, and she's a lot older now, but I think that she has the sort of look that matches Wes Anderson, and she's very sweet. She has the capacity to play very sweet characters, so I could see that fitting in fairly well. I can almost see her like a babysitter kind of character, or like a nanny, or so like a younger nanny.
Okay,
of
I have
kids.
I have a woman on my list, so I'll say mine. I had Dakota Johnson on my list from 50 Shades, of course. She's done Peanut Butter Falcon since. She's done a few horror films. She's in one of my favorite films this year, which is Our Friend. I think she has that kind of what Gwyneth Paltrow has in this movie. I think if you ever watch an interview with Dakota Johnson or you see her acting style, it's very natural, it's very playful, and it's very absurdist. Like she totally likes playing with the weird, uncomfortable humor. Kind of like what an Audrey Plaza does, but in a little bit more of a grounded way than Audrey Plaza, where Audrey Plaza at times kind of feels like she's playing a character. This feels like just a natural person who just kind of speaks their mind. So I kind of like the idea of what Dakota Johnson would do with a Wes Anderson script. And I think there's just like a look that Wes Anderson kind of gravitates to. And I kind of think she kind of fits that like mold of like what a Wes Anderson would look like.
That's pretty good. My last one, this one's a little bit interesting. And this is going straight from like an absurdist comedy sort of standpoint. Hannibal Buress.
Okay, I like that.
I first thought of Tim Robinson from I Think You Should Leave on Netflix, which is hilarious. And if you're a fan of absurdist comedy, you should definitely watch it. And then I was like, no. And then I thought of Eric Andre, and then I was like, no. And then I was like, Hannibal Buress. I think that's a good stopping point where he's not so crazy absurd, but he still has those comedic sensibilities, and he's insanely funny. I can see him being a really good comedic relief sort of character, maybe like a best friend.
Okay,
and,
I like that.
We've seen him in Marvel movies playing minor roles, and then of course, his whole repertoire from being on the Eric Andre show is amazing. He can play the straight man and also the absurd backbone of the comedy that's going on. So I think he's adaptable.
I like that. I like that a lot. So obviously writing the question, I had a few names that just popped into my mind, and I had to eliminate it down to who I thought the third would be. But I will mention my honorable mentions just since I did write them down. Giancarlo Esposito, who from Breaking Bad and The Mandalorian. I think he'd be great.
Very good.
I think Andrew Garfield could have fun in that role. I think Robert Pattinson kind of has that mold.
I know. No, I'm just Andrew. Kidding. I know you mean Andrew Garfield.
Robert Pattinson could have some fun in that role, I think.
Yeah.
I had Adam Driver on there because I think that's such like
he'd be a good fit.
He's such an eccentric, like he would almost be a weird fit because of just like how much of a screen presence he has that is so
he's like the puzzle piece
style.
that doesn't look right, but then as soon as you put it on the board, you're like, that's
he's
exactly the right piece.
He's so big, like he's so physically imposing, like being such a tall guy. Like it almost just like doesn't seem like a fit, but I think it's with Kristen Stewart almost made it on this list. And then the one that barely missed out, but I like the third one so much more. I had Woody Harrelson as like the guy who was like right at the fourth spot, where I'm like, I like the idea of Woody Harrelson.
That would fit.
Ultimately, though, if there was one actor, I'm like, that would be like something to see. It'd be Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage in a Wes Anderson movie. I can't imagine the type of fun that Wes Anderson would be able to deliver with a character actor like Nicolas Cage. If he could like fully like rein him in and be like, this is the movie I want, this is the character, and they have like an idea that they both like and are enthusiastic about, I think Nicolas Cage could kill a Wes Anderson role. I think there's something so like interesting about the way he directs and the way Cage acts, that it's kind of like this weird match in heaven of the yin and the yang meeting in something that's so unique that only Nicolas Cage could do under the direction of a Wes Anderson. I think it's just two like guys who are very known for their style coming together. And I think that'd be such an interesting blend of comedy and craziness and eccentricity that I'd love to see.
For sure. All right. And with that, that will do it for this episode.
Yep. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Follow us on our podcast. Follow me on the Beneverse. Make sure to do all that great stuff. Check back next week. We're talking Blazing Saddles for a 1-year anniversary.
I'm excited
Make sure
for
to
that.
like.
I just peaked the heck out of my waveform.
Yes.
Because I'm so excited to talk about Blazing Saddles.
We'll be hopefully back in person. Make sure to follow us on Bind Media on Instagram and the Beneverse on Twitter and
Links
Instagram
as always are in the
and YouTube.
description down below.
Yep. So thank you guys for listening. I'm Ben.
I'm Bran. This has been Ben and Bran. See you.
See you, Moot. Thank you all for listening. Peace out. Take care.
Bye.